Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our poetry analysis. Today's poem is going to be The Weary Blues by Langston Hughes. Um, I have my copy of the poem here, which I've already done my annotation on, as well as the poetry annotation and analysis guide. Um, I'm going to go through the poem. I'll begin with a reading, and then I'm going to talk about it. I feel at this point like we can just sort of go through the poem. I don't necessarily need to go through each piece of the assignment individually, but I promise within the poem I will hit all of the key parts and ideas. So to begin, we'll do a reading of The Weary Blues by Langston Hughes, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Before you listen to this, you should have done your kind of background research on Langston Hughes. Something important to know going into it that he is a very famous, very prolific writer of poetry and books and dramas and things, and he's very well known as being one of the most prominent members of the Harlem Renaissance. So you need to do a little research on that to learn that he's African American in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, before the Civil Rights Movement, which is significant, and that he's a major force in bringing Black art and literature to the public, making it more well known and respected and accepted throughout society. So do that research and then have a nice listen to The Weary Blues by Langston Hughes. Droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play. Down on Lenox Avenue the other night, by the pale dull pallor of an old gas light, he did a lazy sway, to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues! Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues! In a deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I's goin' to quit my frownin' and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, thump, thump went his foot on the floor. He played a few chords, then he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues and can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no more and I wish that I had died. And far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed, while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead. Okay, that's your first reading. At this point, you should go through and mark what you like with your plus signs, what you're confused by or dislike with your minus signs. I had put some plus signs next to some lines that I really liked. I like the repetition of he did a lazy sway. He did a lazy sway. I like that because when you sway, you don't usually sway once. It's something that's kind of continuous, and the repetition of the words, I think, really brings that to life. I like the lines below that say, with his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. I like the juxtaposition between light and dark, and I think that's probably intentional and significant, which we can talk a little bit about when we discuss theme. And that he makes that poor piano moan with melody. A little bit of alliteration, which I enjoy, but also that something that is worn out and tired, like a poor old piano, can still produce a melody. So that stood out to me as a really nice line as well. So things Things that I maybe struggled with a little bit are the inserted verses, particularly wanting to know where they come from and not knowing that. So something that I would need to go and do a little research on. Is there significance to those lines? Did he make them up, or do they come from other songs? And then they kind of have a different tone and a different meaning. In one, he's putting his troubles on the shelf, and then in the next one, he says he can't be satisfied. So there's a little bit of a juxtaposition there that I think I need to do a little bit more research on. So next, you're kind of going over your initial understanding of the poem. For me, I'm hearing, seeing, and visualizing a black man playing in a club, in a jazz or a blues club, and his piano is old, and he's old in my mind. He's tired, and he's maybe struggling with his status or his station in life, but he doesn't give up, and he has his music. So that's kind of my initial overview of that. Round 2 asks you to do all of your annotating of the verbs, the adjectives, and the imagery. So you can stop me as you need to, but I'll show you a few of mine. This poem I actually feel really lends itself better to this task than some of our previous ones, because there are a lot of really good verbs. There's a lot of good adjectives here that are really going to help us identify the mood. So for example here, droning, the very first word, droning is a good verb. Second line, rocking. Moving on, sway and moan and sing. Let's see, crooned and slept. These are thump, 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 thump. These are all really good verbs. The adjectives that I had highlighted also really add to the mood and the tone of this piece. I had highlighted drowsy and mellow, and then pale, dull pallor. What a great way to describe an old gaslight. I can really see in my mind, the gaslight on the street. It's kind of dark and it's kind of hazy. Maybe it's covered in soot. It's not like a bright electric light. That stood out to me. A rickety stool, so rickety, or raggy tune, melancholy, old for the old piano. These are all adjectives that I think are very strong. And then my imagery that I had circled includes, well, I kind of had a lot. I'll give you the first couple. I had circled the first 2 lines, droning a drowsy syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon. I can really see that drowsy tune. It's slow, it's kind of melodic, it's that rocking back and forth, that sway. So I can imagine that. I can hear it in my mind. In addition to what I just talked about, that pale, dull pallor of an old gaslight, the ebony hands on the ivory key. I don't know if you're noticing this when you analyze the poems, but oftentimes the things that I put plus signs next to without really thinking too hard about why I like it often tend to be the lines that have the best imagery, that have the best adjectives and verbs. Those are the lines that really stick with you. So those are some of the things that I had annotated on my version of the poem. And so I think when I think about the mood of this piece, I'm thinking about that slowness and how it kind of it's a little sad. Sad is a word even used in the poem. Same with melancholy. It even says melancholy tone. So that's kind of your dead giveaway there, that you're supposed to feel a little bit melancholy, a little bit sad. It's a little bit tired and worn out, but without giving up. But maybe worn down. So those are words that come to mind for me in terms of tone. My image that I might use for something like this, I love the image of a worn out piano. Maybe it's neglected, maybe it's falling apart, maybe it has missing keys, maybe it's just really worn from all of the play. But I can see this piano in my mind's eye, sort of my image that represents this poem for me. So back to the poem itself, for the next round, I'm kind of in round 3 now, the analysis, where you're looking for metaphors and similes. There's a couple really good similes in here. One is in the middle where he says, he played that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool. So using like or as makes it a simile, so he played it like a musical fool. Another one comes from the very last line in the poem. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead, right? So he's not a rock, he's not dead, but he slept like he was. So another good simile there. So those stood out to me. You know, I think that the strong descriptions are very closely related to the imagery. So things that you had marked for imagery might also be what you identify as those strong descriptions. So now when I think about the theme, for me, it's pretty closely tied to the history of the poem, which is important why you do a little bit of research on Langston Hughes first. You'll find that he's a social activist, that he lived in New York, but he was a world traveler, and he's really like a people's poet. So he writes about different people's experiences and the experience of African Americans pre-civil rights and how difficult it was to live in America at that time for that demographic. And so there's some pieces of that come through for me. So that line with his ebony hands on each ivory key, I really see the juxtaposition between black and white there, and I think that that is intentional and that he's referring to segregation. I think that the tiredness that we get and the parts that are quoted, those verses that seem like they came from somewhere else about can't be satisfied, wishing you were dead, or that you don't have anybody in this world and that you're on your own. Those might be like common feelings or themes that people experienced at that time, and that helps us understand what people were going through and their conditions. I also would point out too that I think as you hear this read, it's really meant to be read aloud and it's meant to be heard, and that there's kind of an interesting effect where he's writing about something that he's doing. So he's writing about listening to a man play a blues song, but the way that the poem flows also kind of sounds like a blues song. And I'm actually going to add a link to an old video of Langston Hughes reading this poem to live jazz music, and it's wonderful. You definitely need to take a look at it. I'm not going to read this again. Your second reading of it should be watching his video. It's really great. So there's this idea that blues and jazz, these are genres of music that really developed and became popular by African American musicians. And so I think that there's a little bit of a nod, not a little bit, there's a big nod to that because this is their art form and this comes from their experience and their culture and their background, and he's representing that not just in the words that he's using to tell the story that he's created, but in the way that he tells the story. And so, you know, the theme for me is really like bringing to light the experience of African Americans at this time period and celebrating their art forms. In this case, his poetry, but also the popularity, the expansiveness, and the development of blues and jazz. And I think that that is something that would be really great if you're interested to do a little bit more research on, especially if you like music, if you like history and culture. I think you could learn a lot about it beyond what I can give you in this video. But I think it's a celebration to the gifts and the talents of African American artists, as well as a nod to the experiences that they have or had in this case, and that the experience of being an African American in the United States and in Harlem, in New York during the Harlem Renaissance was really powerful and important, and that these are people's lives, and being worn out and sad and melancholy and feeling disconnected from society was a common experience, and I think he demonstrates that really well. So with that, I think I'm going to end this video. Please watch his reading of it. You can rewatch mine too, because this went pretty quickly. So if you need that to go back and complete the assignment, please do so. All right. Thank you guys. See you later.